Good morning. It's good to see everybody here today. One of the facts of reality is that, in the Word, is that there are paradoxes. And these are things that seem to contradict, but don't actually contradict. And there's ways that we can see them in which can help us to understand better. God's protection has a lot of different paradoxes within it. The idea of the protection, the promises of protection, and things like this. And most of us can understand these things if we just think about it. Most of us understand what I'm talking about when I say that there are paradoxes in the ideas of God's protection. In, I think it's October, Carl and I have been here 5 years. Can you believe that? I can't believe it. Lord willing, if you let me stick around till then, we'll be here 5 years. And this has been probably, of 5-year segments, probably some of the best years that I've ever had in my life. I'm not just saying that, it's the truth. And in some ways, this have been some of the worst 5 years that I've had. And I will say it's not because of you. There's been a lot of things that have happened in my life in the last 5 years. I've lost a lot. And a lot of you don't have any idea about it. That's okay. The point is not to say, oh, pity me. The point is that I understand, when I'm talking about the paradoxes of God's protection, I understand. There are things that seem like should not be, but are. And we can grow in spite of those things. And I want to encourage you today. That's the idea. This principle, again, we're talking about coming from the book of Revelation. The idea of God's protection is all throughout it, but it's also very strange to see that God has all these promises of protection when they're facing such trials and difficulties in life. And that's reality. And it's caused some people to walk away from God and say that God doesn't really do anything for His people, or there's no benefit to being a Christian, or there's no help, and there's no this or there's no that. I get tired of hearing people say things like God doesn't really actually care when He does. And we all know that He does. So helping us understand these paradoxes will help us when we're facing challenging times, and also help other people when they're facing challenging times, that we can help encourage them to be the kind of people God wants them to become. So that's the idea behind this lesson. We're going to look at just a few of the paradoxes that are there. The first one is the obvious one of the prosperity of the wicked. Now, you might think this doesn't have anything to do with God's protection, but it actually does. And we recognize that sometimes when the wicked prosper, good people suffer. And yet God allows the prosperity of wicked people. So there's a paradox there, and it almost seems like a contradiction, but it's not. And there are lots of passages we can go to for this. Look in Psalm 37, though. This is one of the classic passages related to this conundrum that we find ourselves in. And in fact, the whole psalm is about this, but the first 9 verses is what I want to focus on. He says, "Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of the workers of iniquity, for they soon shall be cut down like the grass, and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on His faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and He shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in Him, and He shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who brings wicked schemes to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it only causes harm. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord shall inherit the earth." Now this passage, especially that last verse, and other passages in the Bible, is where Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 5, when He says, "Blessed are those who are meek, for they shall inherit the earth." The meek, the ones who understand their purpose and relationship between them and God, their activities in life are determined by their submission to God and willingness to follow Him in whatever they find themselves. Those are the ones who will receive the blessings. And you say, well, wait a minute, the prosperity of the wicked means that they've received blessings, and that's true. They have received blessings. You know, what's interesting, if you look at it from a perspective of God is in control of everything, and He knows exactly what's happening. He gives people free will, which of course He does. But it also says, Jesus Himself said that God causes it to rain on the just and the unjust. And you might think, well, rain is a bad thing. But when you are in a scorching desert at 100 and something degrees for months at a time, and you hear rain falling on the earth, it's never a bad thing. The sun is caused to raise on the good and on the evil, the just and the unjust. They still get the sunrises. They still have the things of this life. God has actually created different rules and laws of this world that people, if they follow it, whether they're believers or not, whether they're good people or bad people, if they follow the rules and the laws of nature that God has created and sustains, they will see benefit from it. There's no question about that. If they will go out and plant crops in the fields, they will have growth in the fields because God has designed for that to happen. The prosperity fact is, wicked can prosper if they follow in accordance with the things that God has set up in this world for how things work. And we shouldn't be surprised by that. It's the same thing as I said. You plant a seed and you see the growth. When you see that kind of growth, you can't wonder why is it that God doesn't allow the wicked to grow fruit, but He should allow only the righteous to grow it. That's not the way He operates. But God has said, here's the thing. Do not envy those people. You know, the thing about the reason that we might envy is because if we're doing things correctly, generally speaking, it takes longer. Generally speaking, if you're doing, and we're talking about just things in the world, there are always shortcuts. We know about all kinds of shortcuts that we could take, and we don't want to take because they're unethical. But if we don't take the shortcuts, then that means that we're doing it the long way. And so people who take the shortcuts, they get there quicker, but it doesn't last. And so it's easy for us to see what they've had, and we see the fresh, fast start that they may have in life, and we think, oh man, why am I doing things the right way, and all these people are prospering? We might even be tempted to do those kinds of things so that we continue to prosper like they did. But the prosperity of the wicked, He says here, do not fret. Verse 7, do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because the man who brings wicked schemes to pass. Cease from anger, forsake wrath. Don't fret. It's only going to cause harm. It's easy for us to get caught up in that. And I recognize that it looks like, it seems like that the wicked should never prosper, especially if they're going to hurt people. Especially if they're going to do harm to the saints. But you know, we see that all throughout the Bible. In the book of Revelation, we see it extensively. How we see, for example, the great beast that rises out of the sea and the second beast that rises out of the land. We also got the dragon, that's Satan, who's teaching these empires how to treat and how to maneuver and prosper in the world. And God allows it to happen. We see it time after time after time. But it does not mean that God is not caring. It does not mean that God is not there for us. And it does not mean that there's not justice that will come upon them. The hard part, the difficult part for us is verse 9, where He says, evildoers shall be cut off. We got to trust that. And notice what He says. But those who wait on the Lord shall inherit the earth. Waiting is one of the most difficult things that we can do as humans, isn't it? I want things now, especially in our microwave society. We want everything figured out right now. I want my relief now. I want the blessings now. But that's not how life works. Things take time. You know, I mentioned this last Wednesday. If you're saying a prayer, or Wednesday before, if you're saying a prayer and you're asking for blessings, God may bless you and give you the things that you're asking for, but you need to remember there are 8 billion other people on this planet who are also asking for things. And God is arranging for things to happen, and He may have them happen for you, but why should we think I need to be first in line to get everything I want and everyone else can go second? But we think that way, don't we? Because for me, what I need and my pressures and my needs, they're all so pressing right now. I can't believe that God can't see that, and yet He's balancing so many other things in this world, in this life. So we need to be careful and wait. The prosperity of the wicked seems like a contradiction, but it's not. It's simply a matter of we wait, but the word wait doesn't mean to sit down and do nothing. Waiting in this idea, waiting in the idea of being patient, is continuing to do what you know is right so that you can see the harvest and the results that God has promised. If we sit back and say, well, it doesn't do any good to do good because look at all these things these wicked people are doing and they're going to prosper and I'm not going to get anything anyway, we are maybe tempted to sit back and do nothing, but that's not the idea. We are consistently doing good. When we're consistently doing good, we will see the results, and it will not come when we think that should come, but they will come, and we will be blessed, and we will see it. And that what we get when we are consistently faithful in doing God's word will last us for eternity. And the things of this world that people are striving for and they're running for and they're taking all the shortcuts to get, the things that they're striving to have and gather for themselves, let them have those things because they won't last. As the flower fades and the grass passes away, right? Everything ends. But the things that we're working toward, the things that we are needing and wanting in life have a larger purpose, and we should maintain that purpose and not allow these things to get in the way. The next one is the persecution and righteousness. This is one of the most difficult ones, I think, that we face. This is one that tempts people to walk away. I've had numerous friends, preacher friends, who've walked out of the pulpit and wanted nothing to do with the work anymore because of this. I'm not saying that preachers are the only one that go through this. Christians face these kinds of things constantly. So we need to recognize that. And sometimes it seems like the closer we get to God, the more likely it is we're going to be persecuted. There's a reason that Jesus said, take up your cross daily and follow me. It wasn't just nice words. It wasn't just a nice sentiment. He was saying, the closer you get to me, if you want to walk with me, you need to take up the cross. The cross represents death. And you follow me, if that's what you really want. And, as far as salesmen go, I don't mean any disrespect to Jesus, but as far as salesmen go, he wasn't a good one. Not the way we see it. Because when you go to a car lot and you walk up to a car and you're looking at it and kicking the tires, and a salesman comes up to you, and what do you expect him to say? You expect him to say all the good stuff about that car. What if the salesman walked up to you and said, you don't want that car? That thing is going to break down every 12,000 miles. You're going to have trouble. It's a gas guzzler. You're going to be burning oil 50,000 miles. You're probably going to have to get a new engine. So you ready to sign on the dotted line yet? Think he's going to have many sales? No. And Jesus, I'm not saying he was trying to sell anything. That's why he wasn't a good salesman. But he was speaking in reality, and he was saying, if you want heaven, it's going to cost you. And this idea that we see people around the world, around the religious world today, they're saying, it doesn't cost anything to be a Christian. That's the biggest lie you could tell. It cost Jesus his life so that you could be saved. It costs you everything you have, but then again, it's in the long run, it's nothing. Because if you give up all the things of this world and all the temporal pleasures and things of this world that we normally pursue and we think that life is all about, we give up all of those things in the pursuit of God and we find ourselves in eternity in heaven, we're going to look back on it and say it was nothing. Of course, from that perspective it is. But from our perspective right here, right now, it costs us everything that we have. And Jesus had no bones about it. He made no bones about it. He said, if you're going to follow me, you're going to give up your life. And he wouldn't accept anything less than that. He never has. And so every time he met with people, every time he had discussions with them, he was always pulling them toward more and more of a sacrifice of themselves. in following him. Do you remember when the men came and said, one man said, I want to follow you wherever you go, and he said, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head? He wasn't asking for pity. He was saying, if you follow me, you're literally going to be sleeping on the ground. Now that was a literal following, right? That was literally walking from place to place with him, which they needed to do in order to learn from him. That's what they had to do. We don't literally follow him around like that. How would we do that? But we do literally follow him spiritually because he tells us and he shows us, here are the ways that we need to go. And that sometimes is going to cost us dearly. And that's really hard for us to grasp. But we think the closer we get to God, the more we should have blessings. And you have them. But think of it this way. Who was the closest person to the Father that has ever lived on this earth? That's Jesus. How was he treated? What kind of life did he live? Was it all blessings and honor? Of course not. Who were the ones who were the closest to Jesus when they were alive, when he was alive? The apostles. Can you imagine that they sat back and lived a life of blessing and luxury? No. Every single one of them, with the exception of John, received a martyr's death, according to secular history. John himself supposedly was thrown into a vat of boiling oil and survived it, and so they exiled him to Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation. I don't know if that's true, but that's what secular history tells us. But we do know that people gave their lives to be with Jesus. The closer they were to Jesus, the more likely it was that they were going to die. And we say we're going to attract people with the blessings. Of course, the blessings far outweigh the persecutions. But Jesus made no bones about it. He didn't pretend that they're going to have great honor and glory. He said, if you follow me, it will cost you everything. And it does. So we shouldn't be surprised when these things happen. Look in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. It does seem to be one of those strange paradoxes that the closer you get to God, the more you suffer. Especially when we're thinking about the fact that God has promised us his protection. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 and 13 says, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you, but rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. Now here is one in the book of Acts, Peter, who was beaten because of his testimony about Jesus. And it says that he rejoiced, he and the others rejoiced, in that they were considered worthy to be persecuted. And Jesus said, blessed are those who are persecuted for my sake. It's amazing to think about this. But we have to think in terms of what God expects from us. And this is part of our growth. You don't become a child of God. You don't become a Christian, and as soon as you get out of the water, you have already given up everything. Yeah, I mean, you do give up everything. But when you're a new Christian, you're having to learn how to give up all these different things. And the more we grow in Christ, the more we should see those things departing from us, right? We're not holding on to those things as much anymore. And the more we grow in the faith, it doesn't matter how old we are. It matters how mature we are. And the more we grow in the faith, the more we realize the things of this world mean nothing. They mean nothing. And the only way to get to that point is to think in the perspective of eternity. When this is all said and done, and everything has all been burned up, and all the atoms of this world have been turned into cinder and exploded, however it's going to work, and we are standing before the throne of Almighty God, the only thing that's going to matter to us is whether or not we hear him say, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your Lord. That's the only thing that's going to matter. It doesn't matter how many cars or houses or how much money we had. It doesn't matter how many shoes we had to put on. None of those things matter. The only thing that matters is, are you right with God? Psalm 119. verse 67, gives us some insight into why God would cause those who are closest to Him to suffer. He says, "Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word." Then look in verse 71. "It is good for me that I have been afflicted, that I may learn your statutes." Hebrews chapter 12 teaches us that God allows us to go through pain and suffering to strengthen us. And it's not that He's cold and disinterested, and it's not that He enjoys us going through pain, but He understands the only way that we're going to grow closer to Him is through the pains that we face in this life. The only way that we're going to learn what is really important is to learn through pain and suffering. The only way that God can be more important to you than anything else in the world is to challenge the ideas that you hold about what is important in this life. We can say all we want to, God is more important than me, but then we face trials and challenges that force us to make a decision. Am I really going to put God above everything else? Am I really going to put God above my pleasure? Am I really going to put God above the way I feel? Am I really going to put God above my family? Am I really going to put God above my own life that I'm living on this earth? Am I really going to put God above the very food that I have to put in my mouth? Is He more important to me than anything? The only way you can know is to face situations where you have to make that kind of decision. And then you can see where you are. And with the Lord's help, and with strengthening and of the encouragement of the brothers and sisters that we have around us, we can come to the conclusion and we can make the right decisions all the way through the pain and difficulties that comes from life. You think about it, Jesus came and died because of His love. His love for God and His love for you. And the only way that we can have that kind of life that's been promised to us is if we walk in the shoes of Jesus and we give up ourselves for others. We give up ourselves for God. This is how we can overcome this paradox of the persecution of the righteous. One other one is delayed intervention. This is a hard one too. If God is in control, this question comes up a lot. If God's in control, why does He allow bad things to happen? Why is it that people can suffer so much in this life and they haven't done anything wrong? It's a good question. It's a valid question. But it's one that lacks perspective. Because think back over the last 20 years, if you've been around that long. How fast did it go? What about last week? It's all relative as far as what we're going through right now. When you're in the middle of something and pain, in the middle of the pain, yeah, it seems like it's so much longer. But in reality, it's perspective. That's one way of looking at it. But we have this paradox of God is supposed to be taking care of us, and yet we see people suffer. We even have Psalms that say, David said, I've never seen, I've been young and I've been old, and I haven't ever seen someone who is a follower of God who is going hungry or in famine. And yet, people, the children of Israel, ate their own children at times because they were so hungry, because of the sins that they committed. There were so many things that have happened in this world as suffering. It's irresponsible for us to pretend that Christians don't suffer. It's irresponsible for us to pretend that since God has promised to protect us, that means that we'll have everything we ever needed and it'll be instantly right there. But God's protection does protect. But it's not exactly the way we think it's going to happen. And in fact, it is possible for us to suffer and die and still be protected by God. And that's so ironic. It's such a paradox. Because we think protection means He's going to take care of all my problems. He's going to make sure that it's like a shield. Nothing can happen to me. No bad things could ever happen to me in my lifetime. I can never go through pain and trials and suffering. And then we go through them. And because we thought, well, God will always protect me because He promised to protect me, and He's not protecting me, therefore that means that I must be not right with God. Do you see how the reasoning can come about? That's why it's so important that we understand this paradox. Even if you're going through severe pain, even if you're going through struggles, you're going through cancer, you're going through whatever it is that you're facing in your life, sorrow upon sorrow, and it's so many bad things, God is still working to protect you in this life. We just have to understand it. Look, for example, Psalm 13, but I meant Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I'm not going to get into that because Spencer's preaching about it tonight. But think about that psalm and the comfort and peace that's promised. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That means I'm not going to lack anything. But have we ever lacked anything? Yes, we have. But we still trust in God to supply it. He talks about how He will protect us from the enemies. He'll even set up a table before our enemies so we can eat in peace, and there's nothing that they can do about it. And yet David himself, at many times in his life, found himself hiding in caves to protect him for his own life. So we have delayed intervention. Look in Luke chapter 18. Here's another example of this. Jesus himself talked about this. It's a paradox. He said a parable to them that men always ought to pray and not lose heart, saying, there was in a certain city a judge who did not fear God, nor regard man. Now there was a widow in that city, and she came to him, saying, get justice for me from my adversary. And he would not for a while, but afterward he said within himself, though I do not fear God, nor regard man, yet because this woman troubles me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. And the Lord said, hear what the unjust judge said. And shall God not avenge His own elect who cry out day and night to Him, though He bears long with them? I tell you that He will avenge them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will He really find faith on the earth? That's a great question. I've asked that question so many times, and I don't know how to answer. I have no idea how to answer that last question. But that's another story. He says, He will avenge them speedily. When it happens, it's going to happen, and it'll happen quickly, but it's going to take a while. That's a paradox. Jesus doesn't even explain the paradox. He says that he is comparing His Father to this unjust judge, not the injustice part, but the fact that it takes a long time to react. This woman had to come to this judge time after time after time after time after time. And He never said, hey, if you're a Christian and you're righteous, all you got to do is come once and then God will take care of it. In fact, He said the opposite of that, didn't He? He implied if you want to receive the blessings and the benefit and the protection of God, you've got to keep coming to Him over and over and over. How many times have you asked, Lord, please get me through this. Help me find the way through this. Help me see the pathway so I can make sure I get the best things out of this that I can get. And you still can't see it. And you're still asking, where's your protection? Where's your help? It's a paradox. But the reality is God is there for you, and His timing is not your timing. But He's still there. He still cares. He still wants to provide. He's still doing everything that's within His power to do the things that are necessary for you to have what you need. This is such an important idea. And we need to get into the idea then related to all these things is the protection that God offers us. The more important than anything else is the spiritual protection that we have, even with our own free will. And this is one of those other paradoxes as well. Matthew chapter 26, Jesus actually kind of points this out. He says in verse 53, do you think that I cannot now pray to my Father and He will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? Do you remember His prayer in the garden? Lord, if it's your will, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done. And He's acknowledging here in verse 53, do you not really think that all I have to do is go to the Father and He will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? Of, that's a good question. The answer is, yeah, you bet he would. In a heartbeat, he could do this. It's almost like the angels would, who probably didn't understand what was going on, I don't know that, who are looking at the situation go, okay, Father, why aren't we stopping this? It's not his will. And Jesus knew that, and he understood it. In fact, in verse 54, how then could the Scriptures be fulfilled that it must happen thus? See, God has a plan. We're a small part of that plan, but an important part. And the things that are happening to you are part of what God overall understands is going to happen. That doesn't mean that he's decided that you're going to be in pain, but it does mean that he's going to use that situation that you're in for his own glory and to help you, if you will stay faithful to him. And remember, if God does for you what you want, it may be that something else couldn't happen that he's working toward. Sometimes we suffer now for something later much better. And we don't know what that is. And we're very tempted to say, I don't really care what the future holds. I want relief now. And yet, the implication is time after time in the Bible. If you hang on and you endure and you trust God and keep doing what you're supposed to be doing, God will make sure that he not only blesses you at the end, but maybe even magnify and multiply the blessings that are there. There's no promise of that, but there is promise that he will get you through it. And in the end, it will be worth it. That's what we learn by faith. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. One of these such things. This is one of those challenging verses again. He says, no temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Now, part of the way that he arranges it so that you can be able to bear it is he always provides a way of escape. And here's the thing. It's there if you're looking for it. But sometimes we're not looking for it. We want to endure the pain, so to speak. Partly, I think sometimes in the back of our mind, we're hoping that we're going to make a mistake. Don't play around with sin. Find the way of escape so you can endure it. That's the idea. I realize that doesn't necessarily relate to pain, but this is also related to temptation. Free will. We make decisions, and God allows us to make those decisions. This also says that if we give in to sin, it's because we decided we weren't going to look for that way of escape. That's what we decided. That's not a good place to be. We all make those decisions now and then. But we have the protection of God. In fact, Jesus in John chapter 10, verses 1 through 5, gives us great words of comfort so that we can know that we can count on him, and he's always there for us. John chapter 10, verse 1 says, most assuredly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. Here's the illustration that Jesus uses to teach us. If we will follow Jesus, he will lead us in the right ways. Trust him. Trust God that he knows how to get you through the situation that you're in. He knows how much you need to go through. He knows exactly the points at which things need to change. He knows much better than we do, but we think we have all the answers. We think we know ourselves so much better. We don't know what we're capable of, but God does. And he will help you through it, but we've got to trust him. Don't get caught up in the paradoxes and start losing faith and confidence. Your faith in God is not determined Your standing with God is not determined by how much blessings you have in this life, how many blessings you have in this life. That is not how you determine whether you're right with God. That's a very dangerous way to look at your life. You might even say that you could look at it the opposite direction, opposite way. When you see the pain, troubles, and the trials that are going on in your life because of your walk with God, that is a good indication that you're on the right path. If it's what God wants you to do. Those are the paradoxes that we have. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And the rest that He gives us, the peace that He gives, is not necessarily a physical peace, but is a spiritual one, and it can be an emotional one as well. If there's anything that we can do for you this morning, please let us know. Please come as we stand and sing.